because when something's new, you're not going to find a manufacturer who already makes the thing. You have to start finding manufacturers that make things like the thing and that have the capabilities, the capacity to make the thing. And then you got to convince them to make your thing. And there's wiliness for sure. Once I saw that it was possible, I was like, okay, how could we do this? How might we make this? And at the start, you're lucky if you can, glue it together with popsicle sticks.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Allsmith. Today, we're diving into the cutting-edge world of biohacking and performance enhancement with none other than Michael Brandt. He is the visionary co-founder and CEO of KetoneIQ. Michael is at the forefront of the metabolic revolution, pioneering the use of exogenous ketones to fuel the body and the mind in ways that were once thought to be impossible. His journey from Stanford to Silicon Valley and beyond has been marked by a relentless pursuit of optimizing human potential. Whether you're an athlete looking to push your limits or someone interested in the science of longevity and cognitive performance, this conversation is packed with insights that could change the way you approach your health and fitness. Let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Allsmith. Today's guest is the visionary co-founder and CEO of KetoneIQ. He's at the forefront of the metabolic revolution, hosting a 2:40 marathon, and he's qualified for the Boston Marathon 4 times. None other than Michael Brandt. Welcome to the show, man.
Bryce, good to be here. Looking forward to a fun conversation today.
Yeah, man. I've been pinging you quite a bit lately, and as we briefly talked about offline, it is cool when we sign up for events and we do cool things within the health and fitness community. And just last week, I was able to chat with Ty Morris, whose episode went up today, and he just completed the Leadville 100. And just over the weekend, I completed a half marathon. And both of us kind of spitballed a little bit about the importance of ketones and how those things help us with our metabolism, with clean fuel. And so you've been on my radar for a long time, and it's just ironic within the last couple weeks that KetoneIQ has landed in my lap, and I'm like, hey, this is amazing. I get to connect with Michael this week. So what does it feel like to kind of hear how your product that started grassroots in between your ears with your co-founder is now really impacting people within the health and fitness circle consistently?
It's really cool. I think the time has come for ketones, and when the time comes for a certain idea to happen in the universe, it's going to happen. Smartphones were going to happen whether Steve Jobs and Apple did it or not. Like, obviously they created and captured a lot of value around it. Gatorade, I love the Gatorade story, First and Thirst, my favorite book. About
What's it called?
It's called First and Thirst, the Gatorade book about
how
they
I
got
gotta
started.
Definitely check that out.
It's really fun. It's how they got started in the 1960s with the Florida Gators. And once people realized electrolytes are strictly better for hydration than water alone, once you open Pandora's box, you don't repack it back in. Once the idea is out in the universe, then it has a way of just coming true. And I see very much that's happening with ketones, that people have known for a long time that your body makes ketones and they're this super fuel. And once we figured out how to make it at scale and made the world's first ketone shot, and then got a multi-million-dollar contract with the Department of Defense Special Operations Command to do further research in the space, that there's no going back from there. That ketones are the super fuel. There's this other metabolite that your body can use in addition to sugar or anything else that you're using for energy, and there's no going back. It's just here as a fundamental new nutritional primitive on Earth, and it's really exciting. And so in a way, like I feel less like I invented it, more like I discovered it, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Like
Wasn't
it bound to
popularized by Atkins back in the day? We had like the Atkins diet, and that started to come to fruition a little bit, where it was like high protein, high fat. And then it sort of started to like dwindle off. I think in the 90s it was like low fat everything, which between you and I kind of became like a chemical shitstorm and just like created all kinds of metabolic issues based on processed foods and ingredients that we couldn't pronounce at all. And it became less about shopping the perimeter of the grocery store and more about like adhering to the thing, which was low fat for a little while. But then there was this like back and forth dance. And now we're coming to realize just this huge enhancement with mitochondrial function in relation to ketones. And so for people that may not understand, like, what is a ketogenic diet and what are ketones?
It's a great question, a good place to get started, because you mentioned Atkins, you mentioned ketogenic diet, and those are ways to make your body make ketones. Your body makes ketones all the time, and it ramps up and makes a lot more when you are in a low sugar state, a low carbohydrate state, low blood sugar. Your body will make a lot of ketones, and you make ketones from fat. And you make ketones especially for your brain, because you need to power your brain. Our brains demand a ton of energy. It's only 5% of your body mass, but 20% of your energy demand for your brain. And if you don't have sugar present, you need fuel for your brain. Your brain cannot use fat, and so you need to turn fat into ketones. And people have known this for 100 plus years. The human body has been doing it for 300,000 years. That is fundamental to our tooling. That's how our bodies work. We did more of it in ancient times because you didn't always have sugar. There's no Reese's peanut butter cups on the savannah. You often were in a low carbohydrate state. You maybe didn't eat for several days, or if you're eating like meat, you're eating food, real foods, and you're not necessarily having access to like super high concentrations of sugar. So your body's very equipped to make and use ketones, and they're a very efficient molecule. Your brain lights up when there's ketones present. One of the first applications of the ketogenic diet 100 years ago was patients that had seizures were put on a ketogenic diet, and their seizures stopped happening, that their brains were able to function better. The seizures had to do with dysregulation of metabolism, inability to metabolize glucose, and that by providing ketones instead, that the neurons were able to function better and reduced these instances of seizures significantly. And so there's this fundamental mechanism of action where your brain uses ketones differently, and in a lot of cases better than how you use sugar blood glucose. And there's just a very cool effect. And that was a light bulb moment for me 5+ years ago when I started looking at the space, getting into it as an endurance athlete myself, and started poking around at metabolism and nutrition and seeing, there's this thing called the ketogenic diet. But what if you can get those ketones without jumping through all those hoops? Like you don't necessarily want to, not necessarily the best for peak performance to be doing such a restrictive diet, but ketones themselves are this very efficient molecule. So what if you could just drink a shot of ketones? And that was the entrepreneurial light bulb that went off for me. And the rest is history. I mean, we're still very early on compared to what I think this could be, but we've come a long way as well, where we got started with the Department of Defense, and it was a really expensive drink, and pro athletes started using it. And now we've gotten to a spot where it's much more mainstream and fundamental tool in the toolkit. And we're still very early to where we're ultimately going to be.
For sure. It's cool to know that was just 5 years ago where you started really taking action around some of those things. I'm sure the thought ideation was there before that. And there was tremendous like grassroots, like tinkering within your brain in your transition from Stanford then to Silicon Valley, and just being around these innovative, like-minded individuals that want to find a problem, solve a problem, and then learn to create something at scale that can then grow and diffuse into the greater community. And that's what stands out to me about you, Michael, is one of my favorite questions on the planet, and I say this all the time, is why can't we do both? Why does it have to be you're only on a ketogenic diet, you're going through a relatively unsustainable version of suffering in order to fast and then start to consume protein and fat in order to put yourself into ketosis, which the long-term sustainability there is just not going to happen. There's also potential side effects associated with leaky gut and some of the other issues that we see when we're just doing carnivore or being in ketosis for too long. And so I think it's really impressive that you thought, okay, why can't we do both? Why can't we integrate this product? It's faster, it's more efficient, and it can stack with all of these other things. So it's very malleable to the human experience and one's goal. For someone like you who's doing marathons, you're going to have some starchy carbohydrates to sustain those long duration intervals and training consistently. Otherwise, you lose metabolic flexibility. You end up having spikes in cortisol, inflammatory responses, and then joint pain, which is what was a really cool part of the conversation between you and Dave Asprey, the founder of Bulletproof. And so when did it spark for you that it can be an and instead of an or, that this ketone beverage can then stack with other things and support people individualistically on their specific goals? Free is the way to be. Life beats us up a bit and causes some bumps and bruises, but that doesn't mean we have to stay on the sidelines. This is why we've partnered with Kinyon Labs. Get back to doing what you love with this incredible portable device designed to get you back in the game. Kinyon is on a mission to move people from pain to possible with their top-rated red light therapy and laser solution, which tackles inflammation along with muscle and joint pain quickly and effectively. What I love is that it's portable and rechargeable, making it easy to actually incorporate into my everyday life consistently. It's small and lightweight, so you can throw it in your gym bag or work bag, or even an overnighter. Kinyon's lasers and LED combo make this cutting-edge device extremely versatile for use with general aches and pains, as well as chronic back pain, arthritis, post-surgery recovery, endometriosis, and more. This has been an amazing tool keeping my elbows and knees pain-free for pressing, pulling, and squatting in the gym. Great tools like the Move Plus give me the freedom and flexibility to continue living life on my terms without limitations. There are a lot of reasons why over 15,000 people are using this device and rating it 4.7 stars and above. Head on over to kinyon.io and use code ALLSMITH at checkout to begin your pain-free journey.
It was the initial idea to have access to the ketone molecule without having to do the diet. That was the first idea, which is, it's one of those ideas that, like, you know, a lot of ideas start out really crazy sounding, and like, why don't we do this thing that we haven't done? Why don't humans become interplanetary? Or why don't we live forever? Or why, like, a lot of the best entrepreneurs, they ask these really mind-bending questions about the current state of things. And I think it's always helpful to consider the most extreme possibility around what you're doing. Like, okay, what if you could get ketones without having to do the keto diet whatsoever, without having to do a ketogenic process yourself? And it turns out that the way that we make it is, the way that we create our ketone dial is that it's actually metabolism. We have bacteria. We have a special kind of bacteria where we feed them coconut and plant biomass, and they metabolize that, and the output is this ketone dial that you can then directly drink. And basically we have the bacteria do multiple of these steps of metabolism of, you know, if you were to eat coconut or avocado, something like that, your body would start breaking it down into ketones. It would just take time, like days. So you don't eat an avocado or a coconut or eggs or any of that stuff and immediately have elevated ketone levels. It takes days. And also, by the way, you need to be low on blood sugar during that process in order to signal to your body to go and make those ketones. So we started with the crazy, like, dumb / smart question of, like, gosh, this is a cool form of fuel that your body makes. What if you could just drink it? And then we kind of backed out into, okay, well, how would you go about making that, and like, who really would benefit the most from this, and like, who could be our first early customer when this is really expensive and like gnarly tasting and required a lot of education, especially at the start. So it was very early on, to answer your question, Bryce, it started really early on with like that like dumb slash smart entrepreneurial idea. And it took a while to actually figure out how to go and do that and to fundraise and build a team and build a
Oh, for sure.
manufacturing capability around it. But like the dumb slash smart early question of, well, what if you could, that actually happened really early on in the process.
I like that a lot. So basically what I'm hearing is, what do you want? And let's find pillars to then backtrack and figure out a path forward. And in the midst of doing so, realize, okay, there's financial issues here. We need to figure out funding. We need to figure out investment. We need to figure out how to play this game. And then it's taking the idea and making it a reality while building out a team. So that way you could be the visionary and kind of have this umbrella view with your co-founder, and then have certain people execute as you go. And I just really love the founder story. And I love going back to, I'll stop myself here based on, you had an experience on Shark Tank and it didn't go the way you wanted. It did not get the outcome that you wanted. But I fucking love your video about you got a rep. You have to go out and get the reps, and you learned so much, and you didn't stop there. You allowed the rejection to be redirection. And I think that's so powerful for the entrepreneurial journey, that all of these failures or perceived failures are simply data points in order to figure out a better path forward.
That's so well said. I actually have that pinned on my Instagram, the L that we took on Shark Tank. It's important to turn all your L's into lessons. It's important to redirect, as you're saying. That's so important. And since then, we've come so far, and we've, for what it's worth, fundraised at much higher valuations than what we were asking for on Shark Tank. And it's still an important part of the fabric of my story with my co-founder, just our team story, is that lesson along the way and getting that rep in. And basically, for those that don't know, early on in the company, I started this company initially. My company is called Health Via Modern Nutrition. Our product is KetoneIQ. Yeah, HVMN. And our product is KetoneIQ. It's the only product we have. We have a couple different types of KetoneIQ, but all we care about, all we do right now is ketones, KetoneIQ. Our website is ketone.com. However, when I started the company, Health Via Modern Nutrition, that was before even having the idea for ketones. And the premise was to create something venture scale, something mega interesting with $1 billion potential within the space of human performance. And we've taken a lot of different bets. We were really early on nootropics. We've had a number of different product lines throughout the years to try to capture that idea of objectively measurable needle movers in the human performance space. And so we've created a number of different lines along the way, and nothing was terrible. There were a lot of like good ideas that weren't great, and you got to be very decisive in your life, in your career, to not let good get in the way of great. Like we had several different interesting, we had like chewable coffee cubes called Go Cubes. Those are really fun. That's actually what we're pitching on Shark Tank. And I remember when we were pitching on Shark Tank, I remember Lori was like, "Oh, it's coffee cubes. What is this?" And I said to her, "Look, you're buying in on an approach. When you're investing in Apple, you're not just investing in like the iPod. You're investing in this approach to technology and this belief that if you're investing in Apple during iPod days, that like they're going to come up with the iPhone, they're going to come up with the iPad, they're going to come up with AirPods, all those things that didn't exist if you'd invested at the time of iPod." And you're investing in this approach, in this team, in this ethos, and this approach towards technology. Obviously, that was lost on the Sharks and probably too like high level for that form. I think Lori was just, the Sharks are looking at the product that's right in front of them, and I'm not. Maybe they should. Like I think that's a fair point of view for them to take. They're looking at the product that's literally right in front of them. And my stance is, well, we're an innovation engine that's continuing to ideate on venture scale. And now that we have ketones, that's all we think about all day. Our whole premise is iterating on venture scale ideas in human performance. And that's fundamentally interesting, that like in this world where you have 50 million people with some kind of wearable on or in their body, whether it's an Aura or a Whoop or an Apple Watch, that I've seen it myself, you've seen it yourself. People are way more decisive about what they're putting in their body than they were a decade ago. How many people do you know who don't have caffeine after a certain point in the day because their aura is going to give them a lower sleep score. Like people are actually making data driven decision, and it's super cool to see. How many people do you know have worn a continuous glucose monitor? Maybe not constantly ongoing, but they wore it for a couple of weeks or a month or a couple of months, and they now know, oh wow, like these XYZ spikes my blood sugar. And yeah, I now know what that feels like. And I know the spike and the crash. And even if I don't have it in my body, even if I don't have the CGM installed on my body, I still understand intuitively what my glucose levels is and how I perceive that on an energy level. So we're in this world where we're seeing the API-ification of the human body. We're seeing this objectivity about what our body is actually doing. And then that's informing a ton of decisions about what we put into our body. So that thesis has been true for the last decade. It's going to only get more true. And the approach to nutrition right now looks very different than it did 10, 20 years ago, where there's a lot of just like hype and superfoods, and like no one knew what anything was actually doing. It's just like, hey, boom, here's an acai berry, here's this, here's that. Now we have actual objectivity, and there's this fundamental approach to human nutrition that is changing the world. And I that was the whole pitch to the Sharks. I get why it was like over their head and not the right form, whatever, but like in my bones, I know it's true, and like we've seen it play out.
I loved it, man. I loved being able
Yeah,
to watch it because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you invest in people, not products. I think,
especially in the early stage.
yeah,
Sorry,
exactly,
yeah.
because like you said, it's an innovative engine. It's taking an idea and allowing it to mature. And then as it matures, it grows branches. And then based on those branches, you may abandon ship on the original product. But it allows for things to spider web and innovate based on the market, based on research, and it allows things to grow and develop. You and I had a conversation a few years ago. You're not the same guy that you were then. I'm not the same guy. The brand is not the same. The podcast name is not the same. If it was, we probably wouldn't be here having the same conversation because it would just be nuanced. We'd be like, dude, we've checked this box already. Why do it again? And so it is this constant evolution and maturity over the course of time. And when I watched that episode, yeah, it was a little bit in the clouds, but I could hear the passion. I could hear the willingness to want to solve a problem. And also for anybody that has ever embarked in high-level performance, AKA a sub 3-hour marathon, in your case, 2 hours and 40 minutes, that's a top 1% person. The fact that you're looking for ways to seek edges, something that's convenient to carry, something that can be stacked with other things, and then you briefly kind of alluded to it earlier, look at the relationship between preventative medicine and reactive medicine. If there's a huge benefit to putting ketones into the system that is beneficial for seizures, beneficial for Alzheimer's, I've had different guests on that talk about a ketogenic diet combined with deuterium depleted water with a carbon 60 serum being advantageous for people battling cancer, and how different cancer polyps cannot survive on ketones, but they can survive on sugar. And so there's different forms and fashions. I highly challenge people to look into that and, chat GBT it, search it on Safari, search it on DuckDuckGo, and try to find some of the nuance in and around the benefits of ketones, because I like you said, we're still at the beginning stages of this. We're at the tip of the iceberg, and I really appreciate you sharing some of the founder's journey and kind of what that perceived little slap on the wrist on Shark Tank and how that was a catalyst for you growing and evolving. How did you manage the emotional component at that point? Right? There's logic, there's emotion. Like, did it hurt, sting for a day? Like, how'd you then advance forward after that challenging experience?
I was on the show. I obviously knew the outcome of it. You're not allowed to say anything before
Yeah.
it airs. You got to sign all the NDA paperwork. And my co-founder and I decided to do the just biggest blowout party. We just invited everyone, like as though we got a deal with Mark Cuban, Mr. Wonderful, everything. We just invited everyone. And I remember one of my friends was saying, he's like, I knew that you didn't get the deal because like you're usually more like a humble person. Like you wouldn't be showboating if you won the deal. Like I felt his comment was like, I felt like it was obvious like you invited everyone out to like have it be fun or have it be like, you know, a salve for the wound of just like, yeah, you commiserate with your friends. You're like, haha, like didn't make it this time, but you're like, you're in good company with your friends and you brush it off. So I think sharing the experience with friends and not being ashamed of it, just really owning it and like, yeah, like confronting it. Like, hey, didn't, this didn't go. And how do we feel about that? And what's the reaction? And just getting out ahead of any shame or embarrassment or anything like that, and just owning it with the people close to you, getting past it. If you think there's any kind of emotions around it, confront them and process them. Don't deny them. Don't
Mm-hmm.
tuck them away. And but don't try to brush past them either. Like experience them with your people, with your friends, with your community, like fully go through it. If there's like some grieving process or some frustration, or I think there were also just things to also learn that like I think it was also just good feedback too, that you got to read the room and like have a really tight pitch. And if we're really trying to get a deal with the Sharks, there's a certain way that you should simplify things and pitch it and do it that way, that it's okay to also like take an actual lesson from that as well. It's not like, oh, we're geniuses and the Sharks are dum dums. Like, no, like there's some truth to the way that they think about things, and how do we update our algorithm to be able to win every pitch, or be just make sure we're learning the right things from that. So I think the one thing I would say at the top there was socializing it, just talking to friends, inviting friends out, having that be part of the process. And then that is very helpful dealing with all the emotions and then rolling through it. And then the next day is just another day at work. It's like, all right, what were we going to do anyway? Like there's another version of reality where like you're not even invited onto Shark Tank to begin with. And like, okay, like let's just go back to that timeline and keep chopping wood and carrying water as we were.
Yeah, man. I really appreciate you sharing that, because if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And in
Oh
the
yeah.
ask, you gain experience. I mean, you didn't lose anything. It's not like it, damaged your credibility or anything. If anything, it helped you transition from, okay, we have a founder story. We have some of these foundational products, but now we're going to help them evolve into maybe a conversion story, maybe a more relatable story to the consumer, where it's not just about you and your co-founder and, this sexy idea, which I think hits right off the bat. And it's challenging to upgrade that operating system, because in the mind, it's like, wait, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If this got us started and it got us from A to B, like, why isn't it working? And I think the reality is, as an entrepreneur, is when you go from A to B, that works, but you can't go from B to C doing the same thing you did in the beginning.
No.
And that's what's been cool about your shifts. I'm curious though, Michael, how did you get into endurance racing and running and finding some of these passions of yours, but still being so highly successful? Like, what was your childhood relationship to sports that led you to Stanford, that started to formulate some of these ideas of high performance?
I was always athletic. I was always a do something active every day was early ethos for me, that you got to get out there, you got to use your body and do something. And I was like a lot of kids, just very competitive. My parents put me in a lot of sports, tennis, soccer, was varsity soccer in high school, played that competitively, club soccer, all that. I was just very, very into it, and just saw that hard work, discipline pays off. That, there were certain kids on the team who their only time they would practice was at practice. And then there were other people who would go out of their way to do drills on the weekend or go for runs or like
Mm-hmm.
do extra practice. And just seeing that it's not this God-given thing that like you're good at the sport or not, that you can actually work harder and earn it more. And seeing that also then with schoolwork too, that my parents were a huge part of this at a young age. They can't take credit for very much, because your parents really guide you on a lot of things. I would, on the weekends, I would go to the local University of Chicago, and do math classes that were just like above and beyond the curriculum at school, and noodle on things that were just different from what was taught in school, and it was fun and interesting. And just it made math fun and different. It was just sets and reps too. I think most importantly, it was just sets and reps that when I came to school, it was like, okay, the SAT or whatever is like easy. Like that's easy mode. Like if you're used to carrying 300 pounds and someone asks you to carry 200 pounds, it's like, sure. Like where, like anytime, right? Like if you're used to running a marathon and someone's like, hey, do you want to go run 5 miles? It's like easy. So I think I was always pushed to this level of like overtraining in sports and in academics, where when it came time to go like take the test or whatever, it was like that wasn't the hardest thing that I'd ever done. It was like the SAT wasn't the hardest math I'd ever seen. Like there was always that push to do better things. I was just reflecting back, but is it like International Science Fair and all this stuff that, again, my parents pushed me a lot on it. I was just like very curious to see. I was always just curious to go further down the rabbit hole, I guess. I think I was kind of bored with the normal system. I was bored in high school. I was bored with classes and the structure, and the bell rings every 45 minutes. You got to like shuffle on to the next thing. I was like, man, like life's got to be more interesting than this. So in high school, I was already pushing above and beyond those constraints. And yeah, I just had it baked into me to be a high achiever from early on. Again, I think my parents believed in me a lot, and then going to college, I stayed active, and then for me, it was getting into endurance sports. It just felt very natural. I enjoyed it a lot. I signed up for my first half marathon with some friends, and then I remember I knew about the Boston Marathon. I knew that you had to qualify in, that you had to run a sub 3 hour marathon in order to qualify in. That was always a bucket list item for me. Like, oh, that would be cool to do that, to like say that you've done that. And so once I started doing my first half marathon, that quickly resolved as a goal. It's like, okay, well, can I run half a marathon in an hour and a half? Okay, if I can do that, maybe I could piece a couple of those together and do a full marathon in sub 3. And I got really drawn to the solitude of it as work life started to pick up and life got more complicated. The ability to spend time on my own and really get into that meditative state when I'm running, that became as valuable as the fitness component, which is the mental ability to, not be on your phone, to be able to like be out in the sun, breathing in air, being in nature, looking at something that's more than 3 feet out in front of your face, like actually looking at the horizon. I remember I just felt so good when I started getting into running. I felt like it's just like your Neo snapped out of the Matrix. That ability to just like go and spend time in nature and have fun on a daily basis. I just look forward to it. I go to bed at night looking forward to tomorrow's run, and it just clicked with me, and I liked it and never really looked back. And so it was a combination of this like meditative, spiritual, psychological lift, as well as I just started really geeking out on the numbers. Like, okay, what's my VO2 max? What's my lactate threshold? What do I do? How fast can I run while keeping my heart rate under 140 BPM? How efficient can I be? What's my cadence? How many times does my foot hit the ground in a minute? Like, how do I get just as fast but have less impact overall on my body? I started just anything that could be measured, I started measuring it. And I guess that for me started being really fun. Just like the intellectual cerebral component of training. Like, how do you maximize that? And I think a lot of sports have this, a lot of like where you can really measure your sets and your reps. And there's something to really like, it's mentally fun to track your progress. And I think that really got exciting to me, because I think a lot of sports don't have that. A lot of sports, you just kind of like do it, and I don't know, you go play pickup soccer or whatever. It's like pretty good and it's fun and whatnot, but you're not necessarily like measuring on a sheet of paper or on a like in like Strava.
There's almost like too many variables in those types of sports, because there's just the implications associated with other people and the unpredictability of those variables. And I think when you're in solitude, like you said, it starts with just do the thing. And then it's do the thing consistently. And then it's, how do I get better at this thing? Okay, where are the transferable skills from this mathematics background where I can actually start practicing some of the specific variables that can then enhance my performance? okay, I have this goal of a sub 3 hour marathon. What are the different metrics that I can look at in relation to, timed intervals, in relation to foot strike, in relation to mechanics, in relation to VO2 max, in relation to heart rate variability? Okay, I'm noticing at this certain time domain, I'm seeing a huge drop off. Can my body metabolize some of those gels and that glucose into fuel, or do I need something that's a little bit faster, a little bit cleaner, and a little bit less challenging on my metabolism in order to sustain this? Okay, what does hydration look like there? And it sounds to me that in the beginning, you didn't know what you didn't know. You liked the feeling, you liked the escapism, you liked the meditative freedom and the time and the space that allowed you to spread your wings and diffuse these ideas into actionables. But then over the course of time, you started to learn, what are the best questions to ask? How do I take this thing that started as like playful fun, and I still want to keep it that way, I being you, but I want it to mature. I want it to get a little bit better, and I want to get faster because there's this goal that I have. There's this experience that I want to pursue, and there's this thing that I want to have on my resume. And I don't know, it's just really cool to see you light up. And I feel like this is something that, you've probably thought of a little bit, but you don't always articulate, like, where did this start? Where did this come from? And watching your wheels spin a little bit and then seeing the transferable skills into how you've built KetoneIQ now is just very cool for me to observe and witness.
There's something really special about endurance running, I think, where it's like impossible to most people. Most people like do not want to go run 10 miles ever.
Mm-hmm.
And then every once in a while you meet a runner, they run 100 miles a week or 10 miles a day, and it's not hard to them. And that was always something interesting to me to wrap my head around. And you see this in other sports. Like I can speak mostly to endurance running. You see this in a lot of other sports. You see it in weightlifting, you see it in CrossFit, you see it in bodybuilding, you see it in a lot of areas where people bend reality. Like, how does this thing that like would destroy most people become easy to this person, or like this person needs to do it? Like if they go a day without doing it, they get itchy. If they go 2 days without doing it, they're punching a hole in the wall. That was always interesting to me. And once that started to click, once I like got to that level a couple of times, I was like, wow, I actually enjoy this. Like, this isn't just challenging, but it's nourishing to me to go and run, and I'm thriving off of this. And I get it. Like, my life is better when I go run for an hour in the morning. It's not just this task I'm doing to get fit or to chase a certain goal. I was like, that's special. Like, how do I lock into that? How do I lock into that flow state? Like, we all know people who work really hard. I've met a lot of people who work really hard in the same way. Like, they're so passionate about their work. They love working, and they see work as this playful, inventive flow state to be in. And I would say 90% of people like hate their job, and it's this grind, and it's this thing you got to do to pay the bills. And like, damn, is it 5 p.m. yet? Can I go? I've met a lot of people who a lot of times they're building. They have a lot of autonomy, whether they're an entrepreneur or they're at a job where they have a lot of control over what they do. They're able to really like swim in it and flourish in it. And it's this playful state. And you have to imagine that Michelangelo, when he's making David, had fun, like that there was some like fun to that. That wasn't just a 9 to 5, right? Like that if you're designing the Golden Gate Bridge or you're writing the next great American novel, that there's some fun to it. And that's a really rarefied air in sport as well as business, when you can get to this spot where you're performing at a higher level than many other people, and you're also enjoying it, and you're in full flow state on it. And for me, what I experienced is that once I started seeing glimpses of that, I was like, oh, let me really lock in there. Like, that's special. Like, that's a special state to be in. Let me lock in there. Like, can I live my life there as much as possible? Like, that just seems like an unfair advantage to be able to live your life in that kind of state.
Also, just the concept of how it has positively impacted all of the other arenas of your life, not just as an athlete and a high performer, but as a business owner, as an innovator, as a fundraiser, as a communicator, as a husband, a father, a friend, there's so many different ways that these actions that you consistently take impact the other areas of your life. And entrepreneurship 101, find what works and do more of it. And if it's positively impacting and having this trickle down effect into everything that you do, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, man. Like, just keep riding that wave, and you're just finding ways to unlock more and more reservoirs of potential. And it's an honor to observe. And where I want to pivot our conversation real quickly is the Olympics just concluded, man. What an incredible performance by so many different athletes out there, and not just from the USA, but you had an incredible video where you just kind of had some different highlights within just remarkable performances, that some of those brought tears to my eyes. Some of those were just like jaw dropping. I mean, the gentleman that came in on the pommel horse for the American team, for them to clinch that third place finish with the glasses and just in his meditative state, slightly different than all of the other guys, and just to go in and execute and then see the connectivity and the highlighting and the celebration was so cool. You know, Noah Lyles getting his chest across to win by just this micro fraction in the 100-meter dash, and then to go on and get gold and a few other things. That finish in both the 1500 and the 400, that kick at the end when you've got lactate threshold, performance anxiety, the butt hamstring lock. Like, there's so many different variables. Like, I see you lighten up over there. And the other one that I want to highlight is the pole vaulter who was from LSU, who competed for Sweden and ended up setting a world record there. And just the ability to stay ready, right? Like, he passed on a lot of those original jumps, so he's kind of just sitting there. And knowing that he's trusting in his training, trusting in his ability to then go attack those higher heights in the pole vault was pretty cool. And then obviously the pole vault one where the wrong stick hit the pole at the wrong time. That video ended up going viral and having quite a few chuckles. But that's just to summarize a little bit. You know, I want to hear your thoughts on the Olympic performances. The Trident family taught me something really important this last year, that we are all a bundle of stories, both good, bad, and everything in between. All of their cold brews remind their customers that they are part of something bigger than themselves. I start my day with the Sweet Cream Cold Brew as I am prepping my mind and body for fitness, service, coaching, and podcasting. With various locations in San Diego, they offer over 14 nitro cold brews and a variety of specialty drinks. You can find the perfect brew and pair it with one of their treats from the Keto Bakery. You can check them out over at tridentcoffee.com and use code ALLSMITH to take your coffee experience to the next level.
The Olympics are beautiful because it's this global event that we all tune into, and there's so many memes that come out of it, and we love a good meme. There's so much culture is formed these days by memes, by these shared moments, these shared experiences that then go viral. And those are more likely to happen in a context where everyone's already watching, because there's just baked in, like, okay, we all saw like that look that Sha'Carri Richardson gave to the next lane over. Like, we all saw that. We all saw, yeah, we all see these, like everyone saw how close the 100-meter finish was. And so that already plants this shared experience in all of our heads. And that's what humans love. It's just connectivity. Like, we all saw that same thing together, and that becomes a point that we can use to relate to one another. It's the way that we all share a meme from The Simpsons or whatever. Like, but it's hard to relate to a meme from a TV show if you haven't seen the show. And as culture has bifurcated a lot, it's way less true today that everyone's watching the same shows or experiencing the same things. And so when a meme does take off, when there is something that's like a truly global shared event, I think it's really special. I think it becomes this reference point that we can all point to. We all know the pistol shooter from Turkey who had his hand in his pocket and is very nonchalant in his presentation and won a silver medal. And it's like so cool. We can all relate to that and like the meme of him versus the person that's like super teched out and trying really hard versus him just being very nonchalant about it. So it's beautiful as a way to connect to one another. Like, only a tiny fraction of people are actually in the Olympics. The rest of us are all like watching it and using it as a way to relate to one another via this shared experience that we're all having all over the world. So I think it's a really beautiful moment in humanity that spikes every 4 years. I think it's funny too, because when you think about it, what are the Olympic Games? Like, it's all made up stuff, right? It's all like, we're all just so primitive in a way. We're all just, hey, you, me, caveman, like, I'll race you to that rock over there. Or like, hey, who can lift the biggest rock? Or like everything is that way. That's why I love track and field, because it literally is like, how far can I throw this ball or this javelin, or how fast can I run around this circle? How fast can I run from A to B? All the other sports are also like even more made up. Like, what the hell is a basketball hoop? Like, why is it why is a 3-point line there? Like, why is this that size? Like, it's all made up. And yet it's fun, and yet it's this thing we all watch and we all agree in the construct. Like, we all agree basketball is basketball, and like, those are the rules. And if you got really good at shooting a different sized ball into a different sized hoop, no one would care, because that's not basketball anymore. Like, we've all agreed that this arbitrary construct, we've all agreed 26.2 miles is the marathon. And if you're really good at running 24 miles, nobody cares. If you're really good at running 32 miles, nobody cares. Like, we really care about these artificial constructs that we've made up. And so it's all very absurd. And yet we've agreed on these certain set of rules as like, okay, this is a fun one that we're all going to agree on. And then we compete on it. And it's very playful. I think there's a lot of just playfulness of the human spirit that comes out in the Olympics. And I think we all know that it's all just the games. It is the Olympic Games after all. We all know it's just the games. And it's, I think, a time to just like enjoy the playful nature of humanity when there's so much serious, heavy stuff going on all the time. You're just coming out of pandemic, and there's like just global conflicts going on and crazy stuff going on in politics and the economy.
It unites
and
us
all
all
that stuff.
together. It's a united front over these made up constructs. And I just fucking love that you described it that way. I'm just going to share a personal experience real quick.
Yeah.
We'll do, in the CrossFit space, there's AMRAPs, as many rounds as possible, let's say in 12 minutes. And, the workout will end. But in my brain, I'm like, well, I'm already in it. Like, I want to like squeeze a little bit more juice out of the orange. Like, maybe I want to finish the rest of this round and I'll go over the 12-minute mark, or I want to do a few extra pull-ups, or whatever the gamification is to just do and be a little bit more to enhance the state or to enhance body composition, whatever the goal is, realizing very much so that 12-minute time domain was made up. And I love that you help people understand that, because that just gives a brief peek behind the curtain of the Michael Brandt mind, which is we could memorize steps 1 through 10 and just articulate for the exam and check the box that we did the thing. Or we could ask, why are those the questions on the exam? Why is this the exam? Why were there 40 questions instead of 37? Like, all of these things are made up, and being able to critically think that way, healthily question, maybe subtly be a pain in the ass, to be a pseudo-contrarian, which I see you smirking over there, which is the ideology of almost every entrepreneur, which is, oh, cool, you did it that way. Why? Why can't we do it this way? This way is more efficient. This way is scalable. This way ends up being a better wholesale cost to maximize profit on the other side. Like, I see what you did there. Now I'm just going to make it more efficient and better. But then it's like, oh, wow, like you're always pushing back. You're not agreeable. And then you have to then do the dance with, well, what gets me funding? Being likable or creating a better process? And the better process ultimately can lead to a better product, because then it's scalable, as opposed to what Dave Asprey talked about on his podcast with you. If you do this amazing thing and nobody knows about it, does it really positively impact the world? I don't know, right? Like, you have to play some of these games and ask some of these questions in order to, have your footprint last, and this legacy that's going to trickle down into the greater population. When I'm saying some of these things and just the healthy questioning, wanting to go against the grain a little bit, trying to press this button on improvement, What are some of the thoughts that come to the forefront for you?
You got to understand the game, and oftentimes it's in your benefit to be good at the game and to win the game. There's such a thing as being too irreverent, where you're too far off the rails. It's helpful to get good grades. It's helpful to pay your taxes on time. It's helpful to show up for your driver's license exam and get a good score and get your driver's license so that you can drive a car. You don't want to be completely contrarian and random in every avenue of life. You're going to actually have a much harder time. You got to pick your battles. And we know the best artists, the Picassos, they all have those examples earlier in their career where they could paint very technically and very realistically. And then they went and changed the rules of their game. And the way they changed the rules of the game was very mindful, is very informed by the fact that they had already demonstrated excellence at the game itself. If you just come in and you're scribbling on the page and like you don't actually have any artistic technique, you don't actually know how to follow the rules, it's not that interesting when you go and break the rules. What's interesting is when you have mastery of the rules and then you bend them in interesting ways. And it comes down to picking your battles. And a lot of times the most interesting battles to pick are from people who are good at playing the games, but then they go and set up their own game, or they go and set up their own like tweak on the game. It's like, okay, I know how marketing should be done by the textbook. And then we're going to go do it in this other different way. We're going to go zig where other people zag. We're going to do it in a different way that breaks some of the rules, breaks some of the conventional wisdom of what's done. But you can only do that in a mindful way when you know even what conventional wisdom is, and to be intentional about the way that you're breaking it. And that contrarianness plays well, I would say, with already having familiarity with how to actually play the game. Yeah. So it's this fun duality of like knowing the game, like being okay to be a rule follower helps you actually be a better rule bender, rule breaker. I think sometimes people see it black and white, where you're either this like rule follower, you do everything as by the books, or you're this like just off the radar, like just questioning everything. And it's like, I think the best people are able to like bounce between those two modalities.
Yeah, I think you summarized that really well. To give some contextual language around this, I don't know that you're either logical or creative. I think there can be an and. It doesn't have to be just a ketogenic diet and then over here is a high performance, high carbohydrate diet. It can be an and. And I think if you have a creative without any boundaries, inevitably that contrarian ideology just ends up being a clusterfuck, really. It's all over the place, and like maybe there's beauty within the cluster, but I think people like what I would describe as frameworks, right? So like you want the rules first, so that way you're like absolutely in the boundaries, right? Like think about like coloring. We want to color in the lines first. If we're just outside the lines all the time, you look at it and you're like, you didn't really do the thing. You didn't understand contrast. You didn't understand. But if you color within the lines for a certain amount of time, then all of a sudden you start to add some of these things. Maybe you add some texture in the background. Maybe there's a little bit of like different color framing that just makes certain things pop and makes other things a little bit softer. That's beauty. And so what I'm hearing from you is like going back to your basketball analogy, if there are no boundaries on the court, the 3-point line is like movable. The size of the hoop changes. The size of the ball changes. People look at that and it's just like, oh, this is made up. I can't really follow what's going on. It's just confusing. And I just see people running around playing with this external object and sort of trying to like defend somebody, but it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
But if all of a sudden you have that framework and the rules are understood, I really like frameworks over rule books. And that's something that Ty Morris talked about. But you have to have the rule book first. And I think once you have that, it allows you to be like, oh, there's a 3-point line in basketball. What about a 4-point line? Oh, that's kind of cool. Like, oh, maybe back in the day there was tons of hand checking. Maybe we get people's hands off and force them to use their feet a little bit. Maybe it allows for upgraded rules that then create this external framework. And now we're seeing the innovation of like a step back and a Euro step and different things that allow for the creativity that didn't really exist back in the 80s or 90s. And so I think you're summarizing it really well. Like, you got to pay your tax. You got to do the game within the game. You got to pay your taxes. You got to follow the rules. You got to make sure that you're doing things by the book. And then from there, it allows you more leash or creativity to bleed outside the lines just a little bit, respectfully and honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. Really well said, Bryce.
Dude, it's so cool to get a peek into your mind. When you're thinking about like the development now and where you're going to go, I want to hear the origin of KetoneIQ a little bit, where, you know, the flavor profile wasn't really there. It was really expensive to make in the beginning. And, you know, you have to go through that in order to get to where you're at now. But what was the original idea, the origin story of KetoneIQ for you and your team?
The origin story was, as a endurance athlete and generally curious biohacker, I tried intermittent fasting, ketogenic diet, all these other levers to pull to improve performance, mindset, biomarkers for lifespan, health span. And I remember seeing this paper about ketones as a supplement, as a exogenous drink that you could theoretically create and imbibe. And I was very drawn to this idea because I knew that through fasting and through ketogenic diet that you could make a ketone, and that ketones are this really efficient molecule. And seeing this idea, okay, this is potentially possible. And you just start asking questions, sending emails. I remember my co-founder and I, we just started talking to the researcher who made that paper. We started emailing different manufacturing facilities, seeing what's possible. Because when something's new, you're not going to find a manufacturer who already makes the thing. You have to start finding manufacturers that make things like the thing and that have the capabilities, the capacity to make the thing. And then you got to convince them to make your thing. And there's wiliness for sure. Once I saw that it was possible, I was like, okay, how could we do this? How might we make this? And at the start, you're lucky if you can, glue it together with popsicle sticks, and it's expensive and crazy tasting, or whatever the analogy is. If you're making software app, like the first version of Uber was, you're like sending a text, hey, come pick me up. Like, it's very janky in the beginning.
Yeah.
And everything is like, early version of Instagram was very rough and simple. And I encourage people to ship things that are in some ways deeply flawed, because you got to get one or two things really right. If you get one or two things really right, you can be forgiven on the 98 things that you got wrong. You'll fix those later. If your one or two things are really freaking right, and they're really powerful, and there's something that no one else has gotten right before, and it solves a real problem for people, then the other 98 things, like all the other companies are doing that, right? Like Gatorade has figured out like how to make the cheapest, most well-distributed like carbs and sugar water on planet Earth. Like, you're not going to be able to out Gatorade. But if you find one or two other things to do better than they are, you don't need to do all of the other things that they were doing excellently. You got to zig where they zag. It's the, Revolutionary War versus the redcoats. Like, you're outmanned, outgunned, all that. You got to do something different from the textbook way of doing things. And you got to be really good at these one or two things, because you're beaten on the other 98 out of 100 aspects. And you focus on those things, you get those one or two things right. And then it's like, ideally, I mean, if you're talking about entrepreneurship, you got to have a customer. You got to have someone who really cares about those one or two things, and they're willing to forgive the other areas that you haven't totally figured out. And so for me, it was that I figured out a way to make a ketone. It just cost $30 and was really low margin and really slow to produce and very small batches and tasted really crazy. But the Department of Defense was interested in it, and elite athletes were into it. The Pro Tour cycling teams, the Tour de France team started using it because it's really good for endurance. Conor McGregor started using it. Jake Paul started using it, invested in the company. Joe Montana invested in the company. We just started getting interesting, high caliber athletes and operators into it, because the idea of a ketone, this idea that it is really efficient fuel source that can help me perform better, those early days when there's all these other things that are not ideal about the product in terms of like price and cost and taste and all that, that people are the people that are willing to do that are the people that are fighting for, like, the percentage marginal gains, and they're willing to pay for it. And then as you solve those and you smooth it out, it's like, okay, well, now you can have a shot of ketones for $4.99 at the local store. Like, you can get it for less if you buy more on our website. Like, we've brought it down to a spot where it's a lot more accessible than it was before. But that takes time. Because you got everything happens in series. So it's really easy, I think, to imagine what a company is like once it's selling tens of thousands of units a day and hundreds of thousands a month, and like what the final form of what it needs to get to. But I think a lot of entrepreneurs would benefit from being really honest in the early days, what you're willing to sacrifice on. You're not going to be perfect. Right now, I have a team of a couple dozen people that are super smart, super talented, and most of the aspects of the business, they're way better at it than I ever was when it was me and my co-founder spinning things up. But it took time to get here. Like, you can't pay all those salaries on day one. I couldn't. Like, you got to like get the initial flywheel going, get some sales going, maybe raise some money, you got to get a few plates spinning before you can get more plates spinning. And in order to do that, you got to be honest with yourself. Like, hey, this isn't going to be, I still don't think our product is all the way perfect. Like, we have new, better tasting product coming out soon. Like, we actually hired a full-time formulator for the first time. Like, we've gotten it to a spot where it's a lot better than it was, but you got to have it be in really basic mode, getting those one or two things correct in the early days in order to even survive and thrive your way to a level where you can have dozens, who knows, maybe eventually we'll have hundreds of people. I'm not in a hurry to, I kind of like a relatively small team, but we have dozens of people. It took time to get to that spot where we could be flying at this altitude.
The entrepreneurial journey at the grassroots starting stages is painful, man. I mean, you're doing everything. I mean, you're not only trying to get your website going, you're trying to figure out payment processing, you're trying to figure out tax protocol, you're trying to play around with branding, you're trying to play around with packaging, you're trying to just get the product right. You're making sure scientifically it's backed by research. There's education, there's relationships, there's trying to get funding and investment. There's, you and your co-founder trying to be on the same page to figure out how you're going to put food on the table in the beginning. When you self-reflect on some of those things, does it allow you to like puff your chest out a little bit that you've gone through something that you were uncommon amongst the uncommon? And like you said, got the flywheel cooking a little bit, got some revolutions, got some reps, to then build enough momentum where people believed in the vision and the mission to then be like, okay, like I'm going to try to pull a page from Steve Jobs and Elon and Jeff Bezos and start to delegate a little bit, because at the end of the day, I'm one guy, and one guy can't build a life-changing company.
It's very much like when you're skiing double black diamond, you don't look down. You cannot look down, and don't freeze up. You need to handle your current position and be as smooth as you possibly can at where you're at. And then before you know it, if you're calm, cool, and collected and smooth going down, then before you know it, you've skied down the whole chute. Then you look back up and you're like, holy shit. Like, but you can't think about it at all. Like, thinking about it and leads to freezing up, and then freezing up is the last thing that you want to do. You have to stay loose. You have to see it as just one problem at a time, and everything that's ever gotten built has gotten built one brick at a time. So when you lay it all out, and it's like, oh yeah, there's branding decisions, and there's co-founder dynamics, and there's the technology, and then there's the manufacturing side, and there's negotiating with wholesalers, and there's setting up a website. Like, when you say it all like that, it's like, wow, that's a lot of work. But each day you can wake up and you can solve one of those problems, or you can solve like a key component of one of those problems and move your position like one unit forward in life, and then go to bed, wake up the next morning, assess the chessboard. Okay, where do we need to move to now? So in aggregate, it's all really scary when you're looking forward at it, and it's really impressive when you're looking back at it. And what I always try and do is just not think too hard about it. Just what can I do today to move the position forward? And if I can do that today, if I can do that for a year, if I can do that for 10 years, then really good things are going to happen. But I'm not going to get too caught up on like all of the things that need to happen. It's just out of your control. Like you're just one person. There's
Yeah, it's like
all that you
drinking
can.
from a fire hose at that point. And I think it very much relates to endurance running in the sense of the voices are going to come into your head. You're going to have self-doubt. You're going to have frustrations from the pre-run. You're going to have in the moment challenges and thoughts that start to enter the brain. And then you have the anticipation of what's to come. And all of those things are just nuanced thoughts traveling through the headspace that maybe you acknowledge for a moment, but then you just get to cut that cord and let them go, knowing that you're one human at one moment in time. And despite that little voice maybe telling you to quit or to stop, or that you're overwhelmed, or this is too much, or whatever that is, you still have the power to put one foot in front of the other. And I think when you just focus on like kind of looking down and just being very narrow focused, before you know it, you've done the double black diamond, you've climbed the staircase, you've run the marathon. And I think you articulated it really well. What I'm curious about are, what are some of the biggest challenges or misconceptions that you have encountered in educating people about ketones and metabolic health? Because there's everything that you just described, but then there's what I say and what you hear could be different. How is the narrative and the education structure absorbed by the consumer and then on the same page as the creator?
The biggest challenge is that ketones actually do a lot. It's like if you invented protein or if you invented caffeine. Like a lot of people can benefit from protein. Bodybuilders can benefit from protein. Older people dealing with muscle loss can benefit from protein. New mothers need protein. Like a lot, it solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. And I use that as an analogy. Ketones have a different set of benefits, but it's incredulous or unbelievable that ketones can help you be a better endurance athlete and then can also help recover brain activity after a concussion. Like how could the same thing do both? Like there's no way. But it's true. But to answer your question, what's hard about entrepreneuring in this area is that I often find myself, my team, sharpening down, like talking about less breadth so that we can do a really good job of talking about a depth of one area. It's really hard to sell something that does 5 different things. It's a lot easier to sell a product that does one thing really well, and then you just stack on that one area really strongly. You do it in all your partners talk about it, all your creative talks about it, you make memes about it. Like you take the one dimension that really matters the most and you really amplify that and be known for that. Be famous for the thing that you do the best. I always think about like Halo Top ice cream did a great job. Remember when they like blew up and everyone was having Halo Top? They did a great job of being this like low carb ice cream. And before that, they had some like other packagings before that where they had like, there's like 4 or 5 different things about Halo Top that no one even remembers anymore. And once they simplified their packaging to really focus on how low carb it was, all of a sudden that's what made it really take off. RX Bar had like really crazy kooky packaging before they came out with the canonical packaging that we all know, that's just like, hey, simple A, B, C, D, E ingredients, 1 egg, 2 dates, whatever. Like they had some other packaging before then that tried to convey a lot, and they boiled it down to like, no, we want to just convey that this is simple natural ingredients that you'd find in your kitchen. And so The biggest challenge with ketones is sharpening down to a sparse, simple set or even just singular benefit that it provides, and being willing to clip those other benefits and being okay with talking about, hey, this is high performance energy that's going to feel really good. And not talking about, like, there's so many other things it can do. You were just saying earlier about how certain cancer cells thrive more on glucose, and when there's ketones, they cannot survive on that. Like, okay, that's a really interesting benefit, but like, I can't load all that in. If I'm trying to compete with 5 Hour Energy and get someone to grab KetoneIQ at the 7-Eleven, it's got to be, you got to keep it simple, Sally. Like, for most people, and then my attitude towards it is simplify, 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 and then, like, for the people that want to double click in and listen to a podcast or read a whole blog post, like, we have those resources available. But the hardest thing has been simplifying it down and having that tip of the spear be like really diamond sharp.
I love that answer. Like, for me, it's something I talk about in the coaching space, something I talk about on almost every episode. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. It always works. Hinge, squat, push, pull, carry, and sprinkle in monostructural stuff. Eat real food, ingredients that can be pronounced, that are typically on the perimeter of the grocery store. Get natural sunlight, treat people appropriately, hydrate consistently, and try to get 8 hours of sleep at night. Wow, that just is everything that could maximize your human potential in one sentence. It's a very interesting facet, and I really appreciate you sharing that. I have a couple last minute questions for you, Michael, and one of them is, how do you see the future of nutrition and health evolving over like the next decade? Now that people have all these wearables, they're gaining all this contextual knowledge, they're seeing how they feel, they're seeing how they perform. What do you think the role of ketones will be in that landscape?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, this conversation in general has been amazing. And unfortunately, I got to go in 3
Cool.
minutes here.
All good.
Do you have a hard stop? But maybe we could pick this back up because this is so fun. I feel like
You and I can always play ping pong, man.
Yes. To answer that question, it's so exciting how we are in this era of quantified self, where we have devices on and in our body. We have these sensors that are telling us how we're doing, and we're able to see our sleep score and our heart rate and our blood glucose level. That we're still so early on that. We're still figuring out which of those metrics really matter. There's such a thing as too many metrics. I think sometimes people feel overwhelmed by the data that they're getting from their wearables.
Paralysis by analysis.
Yes. And yet, if there's one or two to really focus, I think sleep score has really emerged for people. That this idea of, like, I slept better versus worse. When I have alcohol, I sleep worse. When I train, I sleep better. Oh, but when I overtrain, I sleep worse, right? Like, people have this sense of sleep score as being this thing that matters. And we're going to continue to see emergence of what are those KPIs that individuals or that collectively that people really care about among all of the possible analysis paralysis. There's only so many things that you actually pay attention to on your car dashboard. You pay attention to mainly your speed, and then every once in a while you see, like, how's your gas level, and I don't know, maybe you check, probably less people check out their RPMs, and then there's a lot of other stuff going on that doesn't even show up on your dashboard. And I would say we're still actually pretty early towards that goal for the human body, where we're just starting to get all the sensors in, and all these companies are trying to figure out what's the best UX for presenting that data to make it, not analysis paralysis. Within that, ketones are awesome. Ketones are a form of energy that don't interfere with your sleep. So that's already just a very easy one, that people are cutting back on their caffeine. They only want to have a max amount of caffeine in a day. They want to cut off their caffeine in the afternoon. And the ability to have a shot of KetoneIQ and not spike your caffeine level and not interfere with your sleep, that's one of the biggest benefits of the product. And we're lucky that that just registers objectively, that a lot of people happen to care about their sleep score right now, and they can objectively see too much caffeine, no bueno, but hey, I have this afternoon slump. I really want to be dialed in for a meeting in the afternoon. How do I be sharp for that? Well, cool. Now there's KetoneIQ for that. So I think we're going to see more along those lines.
Love it, man. We got 60 seconds on the clock. How would you summarize KetoneIQ in an elevator pitch, and where can people find it, and where can they find you?
KetoneIQ is high performance energy, where the energy comes from ketones, not from sugar or caffeine. You can find it on our website, ketone.com. You can find it on Amazon as well. You can also find it in a ton of stores. We're in every Equinox gym in America. We're in Sprouts grocery stores nationwide, and a lot more doors coming soon.
You're an
And you
innovator and a
can, whenever you
visionary,
find
man.
us, oh, sorry.
No, you're an innovator and a visionary. I just think it's so cool that it started the way it did, and now it's just starting to diffuse and blossom into the greater world.
Thanks so much, Bryce. This was a ton of fun. Really appreciate
Michael,
you
we'll
having
have
me
to
on.
do it again, man. I appreciate you. Kick some ass out there today, and I appreciate you giving us a peek behind the curtain within your entrepreneurial journey in relation to KetoneIQ.
Thanks, Bryce. Thanks, everyone, for listening in.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed my conversation with Michael Brandt from KetoneIQ, please rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends. And as always, stay on the hunt for who you've not yet become.